The do you how do you work with your novels and your plays? Do you have to enter a different mode of thought, or is it hard to shift gears between those two genres?
No, but like I mentioned, I haven't been writing poetry since '05 because poetry, line by line, word by word, is heftier. It's I guess if you were to use it, it's the short of it. It's powerlifting.
Mhm.
Whereas both all the prose is more like long distance running, or maybe rather than using power, uh, you have to be a sprinter in poetry. You have to be Usain Bolt, and you have to be able to get out of the blocks and shoot
Mhm.
that. For me, I'm doing the marathon. I'm doing the ten
Yeah,
thousand meter
yeah.
race where you're going to pace yourself. If I try to get back into sprinter mode now, when I'm retired, I may be able to do that because I'll say on the weekends, what I used to do is I used to write. I would be working. I had a number of jobs that I worked Monday to Friday. I would write 4 or 5 great poems on the weekend, and then I go to my job and I take notes for the next weekend and write those poems. And some of the poems, if they were longer, I'd bring into the Uptown Poetry Group or any other poetry group I might have been going to at the time. Um, but uh, so it's harder, and I know number one, it would be harder to go back and forth between poetry and then drama, short stories, and I haven't done short stories for a decade or more too. Simply, it's not my favorite form. So I basically novels and now plays mostly for the last 7 or so years. Although I've done 8 or 9 novels in between, and some long, hefty ones too. Um, but it would be too much. Now, when I'm retired, like I said, I could maybe then do during the weekend. I'll do my poems, and then I can switch in the week and go back to the whatever prose I'm doing. But that's a
Mhm.
few years off.
So what's your process? Well, one, so you consider playwriting staunchly in the prose category.
It's it's concentrated, but in a different way than poetry is concentrated verbally. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Plays, really good plays, are going to be concentrated dramatically, and the difference is you
Mhm.
could I could write a poem. I have a poem called a sonnet called "Shonosaurs Drying on Nevadan Beaches." A shonosaur is a type of plesiosaur, and so it's the death moans of this group of
Mhm.
plesiosaurs that have been beached on a beach 120 million years or so ago. That there's no inherent drama there, but it's an interesting moment. Now,
Mhm.
when I'm
Mhm.
writing drama, drama can strip everything away. I can
Like
just have
point
character
Shaka.
A B says. I don't have to describe, Johnny wrinkles his nose and wipes it and then goes after
Gotcha.
Susie. Uh, it, it and also because it's more like writing a skeleton. The writing of the play, I can write a great play. You got great if you got shitty actors, they're gonna fuck it up.
Right.
And
Right.
I can write a mediocre play. If I have great actors, they will do quite well with it. It's a different kind of thing. You're sort of like dropping cookie crumbs in the forest for the actor to follow. I don't have to do it all. I inherently, if you notice, I don't know if you've read how many plays of mine you read. I used to do a thing like the Charlie Brown thing, wah 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 wah, and I got MWAH just to give the sound of if someone was a foreigner we didn't understand. But now I've taken to using tildes because
Yeah. That
the
was
ti-
my question. Yeah.
the tildes you can let's say if I have 100 tildes, you can either look at them as 100 separate words that the character could say, or if it takes up 3.5 lines, it's a 3.5 line response. So I give the actor the way to fill it in. When I'm doing this Saladin Richard Lionheart play with the translators, when when the translator is speaking to just Saladin, his translator speaking to him, we can hear some of them talking in English because they know the language that they're sharing. Same thing with the translator for Richard and him, but they can't understand each other, so we just see the tildes there. And sometimes I'll have just 1.5 lines, another one maybe 5 lines, and that allows that in each performance, each actor can then say, well, I can either use about a 200 words, or I can use just two lines there, and depending on which performance they might go, and it gives more for the actor to do and gets them more involved, because it's not really that important, since the translators are going to be translating to each other, so we're going to know generally what they're saying, but we may not know if I have a Tilden, Saladin smiles or giggles to his translator, we know that they may have an in joke. What that is, it doesn't really matter, but that gives something about the relationship between the two of them. Whereas you may not have that on the other side with Richard and his translator. So you have to think of these kinds of ways to play with these things. When I first came up with using the tildes, was it in my Great Khan's play, or it might have been in a more historical play. I'm not certain. But I like it better than the mwah-mwahs. Now, if I was just doing a straight comedy, I might go back and use the mwah-mwah-mwah kind of thing, or something else there. Who knows? Maybe at some point I'll do a play for mimes. I don't know.
Oh, now we're talking. A commedia dell'arte. Well, in classic music, they used to do that all the time. It's funny because people think of classical music as this very staid, austere performance that has to be played exactly the way Beethoven wrote it, and that a genre like jazz is more freeform and improvisatory, but the reality is that classical composers trusted the musicians to be able to ad-lib certain sections exactly as you're describing with the plays. When you're writing a play, do you consider it as a sprint or a marathon, to use your analogy?
It might be more like doing hurdles, because you're not doing something super long like 400,000 or 500,000 word book.
Right.
You're not doing a 14-line sonnet or a 10-line poem, but you're doing something that's different, because it's not simply the writing. The omissions, what you leave out, what you allow for the director, because there are sometimes I'll use stage directions and I'll say characters should be dressed in era-appropriate clothing. Well, that leaves a lot for the designer, the clothing.
Yeah. Or another common Schneiderian conceit is at the start of the play you go, lighting and atmosphere is more important than the actual dress, right?
But I mean, you're always going to have a little bit of that. Like I did a play. I've done like 3 plays on Native Americans. One is on the Mississippian mound building culture, which I have. It's called White Buffalo, which has a father and a daughter escaping from the town that's been ravaged by the white tribe, and they are the black tribe. This also then brings in modern race issues here in the country, because the white tribe is the bad tribe, trying to extinct the black tribe. I also have one about the Mi'kmaq people of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and they're meeting with the Vikings, and there was a very famous fierce Viking warrior woman who had red hair who would dance naked on the ships, and this has been reported in some of the sagas. And so but the thing is, in there, the Vikings are the ones that have the tildes. We can hear the Mi'kmaq, but the stranger, the other, are these weird white people. And then the fourth one is basically a 4-character play: 2 Comanche and 2 Apaches. The Apaches have been, and they are. It's also like with the Hazel Hall play, where she's up on the 2nd floor. They are situated high or low, and on either end of the stage in mountains, they can shoot arrows at each other, let's say. And so that's actually a very Rod Serling-esque play, because it shows these are 4 people who are going to kill each other no matter what. Their hatred. And the reason I do that is because I get sick and tired too of the noble savage idea of Native Americans.
Sure.
That they didn't have bloodlust, they didn't have slavery, they didn't have torture and cruelty and whatnot. And the Comanches were, in a sense, very much like Midwestern Nazis. They hated other tribes. They were the
Yeah,
most hated
no, there
tribe.
was a lot of intertribal feuding. Yeah.
So anyway,
Go, I mean, well, I don't need to tell you that. I mean, you're
but
the
but here's the thing: you'd never see a play like that written by someone of Comanche or any Native American descent because they want to preserve the status quo that they are the permanent victims, and they certainly were the victims of white Europeans. That doesn't mean that they were sainted to each other, and I have every right as an artist to write that. If you don't like it, then you write your version of that
yeah,
fucking
right.
play.
Speaking of writing, so is your process, you're working 5 days a week, thinking about what you're going to do on the weekend, and then you execute it?
Well, now I work in retail, so sometimes I'll have a Saturday off. Rarely I'll have a Sunday off. So it's much more. But I mean, actually what I do now is in the mornings because I work usually from about midday till 7:30 or 8. So in the mornings I'll do the writing on my work days, and on my days off, like today, I spend time painting one of my rooms and doing some errands. So I do all my errands on my day off, especially if it's during a weekday,
Mm,
and then I'll do my writing. And then when I'm done with it, I'll email myself a copy of the play so that I don't lose it by tomorrow if something happened to one of my computers or something. And then I just pick up the next day and write another, depending 1 to 5,000 words, depending on how much time and how much ideation I have.
I see. So for a novel, you're looking at maybe a couple weeks of solid writing to get, but you get it done. You're,
Well, it depends. The last novel I did took, let's see, what was the last novel I did? I don't even remember fucking all the stuff, but for example, I did a novel about Tallulah Bankhead, the old movie starlet,
mm,
and that took about 5.5 months. I did that World War II aftermath novel that took about 9 months. By contrast, when I was younger and I had a more favorable writing schedule, I did the almost 2.5 million word Norwegian in a Family. I did that in 17 months. Um,
mm,
so and there, because I was working overnight at the time, on my nights off, for example, I would work overnight 10 to 6, but on the nights off, I would get up at around 10:30 at night, and from 10:30 till 7:30 or 8 the next morning, I would write, and I do, depending on how motivated, 5 or 10,000 words. But the interesting thing, is because of the middle of the night, sometimes I find myself falling, asleep like at the wheel. But then I write, and I force myself to write through, and I would get all the supposed benefits that people talk about using LSD or other kinds of drugs just from the weariness. By pushing
yeah,
myself and my mind there, I could bring things in. The world became globular. These ideas would be sort of like a lava lamp coming into me. Oh, here comes the orange stream, and it breaks off too. Boom, and now I have my characters. And uh, in a sense, kind of miss that. Although as I've gotten older, I don't miss it that much physically. But you find new ways, and that's how you go through
mm,
periods. You go through the blue period, you go through the red period. These are the ways, and ultimately you have to look at that as a good thing because you're not repeating yourself. Because if I don't have an 8 hour stretch over the middle of the night when my wife is sleeping, and I can do these things when I'm half falling asleep, you know, it I'm not going to be repeating myself. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. If I never looked at a Norwegian in a Family again, and I said I want to write a 2.5 million word novel and I remember the character, it would not be like it in all its ways. I don't know if you've read parts of it yet, but you'll see. Uh, if you were to look from like one to, I think this is 198th thing that I read, and there's some collections that I have together. But let's say I have about 175, 180 unique works, plays, books of short stories, novels. Not to mention that I could put together 30 or 40 books just on the essays on Cosmoetica,
yeah,
plus my poetry. If you look at everything written in a kind of order, you'll see you know, how things change here and there. And I go back and look at some of the writing styles from some of the earlier stuff that I did 15, 20 years ago, and I don't see, it's not just growth, but change, adapting to the subject matter, being, you know, people will say, oh, Dan says he's so great or whatnot, that's such an ego. But when you're changing and adapting your style and your interest, that's sublimating the ego. That's putting the ego aside as an artist to let the best possible thing come through for your reader. That's the opposite of egoism. But most people are too stupid to understand something like that.